Hello, and welcome to this Migrating Delphi Case Studies webinar. My name is Al Manarino, and I'm one of the Embarcadero software consultants. Joining me on this webinar is Mr. Terry Dietzler from the DSW Group. The DSW Group is one of Embarcadero's third-party independent consultants. And also helping on this webinar is Embarcadero's David I. from our Developer Relations Group. On this webinar, we will learn how to migrate from older editions of Delphi with some stories of what to look for and how to update your code, including tools and resources to help you along the way. For the agenda, this webinar will focus on these 5 areas for migrating legacy Delphi to the current Delphi version. First, we'll discuss migrating third-party components and libraries. Then, Mr. Terry Dietzler from the DSW Group will cover Migrating Unicode and show how to use the Unicode Statistics Tool to estimate time and effort for the Unicode migration and show examples on how to modify non-Unicode code to Unicode for Delphi types like char, read, string, pointer, length, MultiByteToWideChar, etc. For migrating data access, we'll hear from David I. on how to use the Refine tool to migrate off of some of the older data access libraries like the BDE or AnyDAC or DB Express to the newer, more performant FireDAC data access library. For migrations of middleware, just in case some of you have MIDAS DCOM apps, we'll show the resources to move from MIDAS DCOM to the newer DataSnap middleware. And lastly, to convert your VCL to FireMonkey apps for when you have the need to target multi-device platforms like Windows 32, Windows 64, Mac OS X, iOS and Android, you will be able to leverage your existing VCL Windows applications and create multi-device true native apps. The MIDAS VCL to FireMonkey converter tool will help you to convert your VCL apps to FireMonkey apps. The MIDAS converter is a third-party IDE extension that automates some aspects of migrating VCL applications to FireMonkey. In this webinar, we will look at and learn how to use the Get It package manager to allow you to browse, download, purchase if needed, and install Get It packages into the current Delphi version. Use the Tech Partner directory to find third-party libraries. Use the Unicode Statistics Tool to estimate time and effort for the Unicode migration. Show how to modify non-Unicode code to Unicode for Delphi. We'll see how to migrate from the Borland database engine BDE to FireDAC for SQL databases like Embarcadero's InterBase database or other SQL databases. We'll see how to move from MIDAS DCOM to DataSnap. And lastly, we'll see how to use the MIDAS VCL to FireMonkey converter tool to convert your VCL forms to FireMonkey forms. Let me first mention Embarcadero has created a new Migration and Upgrade Center webpage at Embarcadero.com, Rad in Action, Migration Upgrade Center. This Migration and Upgrade Center website is here to help you navigate your migration from older editions to the newer current editions. We really want to know how you are doing with your legacy Delphi and C++ Builder migrations, so please try using the Talk to a Migration Specialist Today button that will get you in contact with an Embarcadero resource to help with your migration and help answer migration questions. The web page focuses on these 4 main areas of migration: Unicode, migrating to 64-bit, migrations of database and middleware, and migrating third-party components and libraries, with each section providing tools and resources to help with your legacy code migration. Now let's look at migrating third-party components and libraries. One of the first questions to ask when migrating legacy Delphi code is, what third-party libraries and/or components are you using in your older Delphi projects? The third-party plugins libraries need to be rebuilt in the current Delphi version. Having the source code makes this easier. You will need to recompile your third-party components and libraries from older Delphi projects using the current Delphi 10.1 Berlin version so the components and libraries can be used in the current Delphi projects. Any third-party components and libraries without the source code may need updated versions for the current Delphi 10.1 version. To help you find third-party components and libraries, you can start with these links for some of the third-party components available with RAD Studio. This first RAD Studio Tools and Components link shows the tools and components included in RAD Studio. So as we know, RAD Studio includes hundreds of components for everything from creating user interfaces to database connectivity, making it fast and easy to build connected business applications for desktop and mobile platforms. In addition to the included VCL and FireMonkey components, a broad range of tools and components are available from the Delphi and C++ Builder community. So it's possible that one of your legacy third-party components or libraries could be replaced by one of the included components in the new Delphi 10.1 Berlin. Next, you can search all tools and components on the Embarcadero Technology Partner Directory website. Here, you can find all the tools and components that have a version for the current Delphi 10.1 Berlin or any other version. So for example, to find all Delphi 10.1 Berlin tools and components, I can check the Delphi 10.1 Berlin box for all platforms, for all industries, for all categories, and for all countries, and click on the search box. And in a few seconds, over 160 tools and components get returned. So there's a very good chance you'll find your third-party component or library to be used in the current 10.1 Berlin version of Delphi or C++ Builder here. Also, what's really nice is the current versions of Delphi includes the new Get It Package Manager. The Get It Package Manager allows you to browse, download, and purchase, if the component is not a free open source component, and install the Get It packages into the current Delphi versions. So let's take a quick look at how to use the Get It Package Manager. So here I'm using the current RAD Studio 10.1 Berlin. And let's say, for example, I go to open up one of my legacy Delphi applications and the IDE tells me that I'm missing one or more third-party components or libraries. The error message says class T APD COM port not found. So here I'm using the very popular TurboPower Async Pro library that I do not have installed into my IDE. So let's see if we can find it using the Get It Package Manager. Let me click Cancel. So here it takes me into the source code where we can see our missing libraries and our missing components. So again, let's see if we can use the Get It Package Manager to find this missing TurboPower Async Pro library. You access Get It Package Manager from the IDE Tools menu, Get It Package Manager. The Get It Package Manager currently includes 31 of the popular free packages such as libraries, components, IDE extensions, and SDKs like the open source TurboPack components, the JEDI Visual Component Library, etc. And they are all certified to work in the current Delphi version. So that means you may not have to search for third-party components or libraries that you need. You may just find it in the Get It Package Manager. For this version of the Get It Package Manager, we see we have 84 items in total. We have 3 libraries. We have 29 different components. And we also have 52 Internet of Things devices that we can install and connect to. To locate a specific package that we want to install, we can use the search box in the top left corner of the window. So for our example, we're looking for Turbo Power's async professional components. So in the search box, I'll type async. And we do see that our Get It package manager does have our Turbo Power async professional component. So that's great. We can now click the install button to install this package. And in the dialog box that opens, we can read the licenses of the package and its dependencies, and we can click agree all if we agree to all the terms. And we see this install window opens and shows us the progress of the package download and installation. So here we see the installation has completed, so we can click close. The Get It package manager compiled the package for all available platforms that the package supports. Now later on, if you add a new platform into Red Studio, you would need to compile the package for those platforms either by uninstalling and installing the package again, or by compiling the package manually. And as you can see here, once you're finished using the package, we can simply click uninstall and it will remove the package from the IDE. So that's also great. We can now click close to the Get It package manager. So now that our Turbo Power Async Pro package has been installed into the IDE, we see that our errors go away and our project should be able to build now. So it now builds fine, so that's great. And while I'm in here, let's quickly look at some of the other cool components that you can get from the Get It package manager. So if we look at components, we have Abreva, which is a compression toolkit for both Delphi and C++ Builder. We have Async Pro, which we just installed. Kanopka's signature VCL controls, Radiant Shapes, CodeSite, DOS Command. We have Turbo Power's Essentials, FireMonkey's Fast Report. We have Turbo Power's Lockbox. We have the Omni Thread Library, which is a simple to use threading library for Delphi. On Guard, which is a library to create demo versions of your Delphi and/or C++ Builder applications. Orpheus is an award-winning UI toolkit for both Delphi and C++ Builder, containing over 120 different types of cool components. Power PDF is a VCL component to create PDF documents visually. Sign Edit is a syntax highlighting edit control, not based on the Windows common controls. SysTools is a library of utilities and routines and classes for both Delphi and C++ Builder, with some cool routines like 1D, 2D barcodes, sorting, money routines, math routines, etc. And lastly, Virtual Tree View, which is a Delphi and C++ Builder tree view control built from the ground up. So that's all great and easily obtainable from the Get It package manager. The last topic on third-party components that I want to briefly discuss is, after searching for all the third-party components and libraries you used in your legacy applications, and if you discover you must replace a library or component with a new one because you cannot find that specific third-party component or library, then consider using an adapter pattern to make the old library compatible with the new one. And this link here has coding examples in both Delphi and C++ on how to use the adapter pattern. Here we see the adapter pattern is used to convert the interface of a class into another interface clients expect. The adapter lets classes work together that couldn't otherwise because of incompatible interfaces. At this time, let me turn this presentation over to Mr. Terry Dietzler from the DSW group to show how to use the Unicode Statistics Tool to estimate time and effort for the Unicode migration and show examples on how to modify non-Unicode code to Unicode for various Delphi types like char, read, string, pointer, length, MultiByteToWideChar, etc. The DSW group is one of Embarcadero's third-party independent consultants.
Hello everyone, I'm Terry Dietzler with the DSW group, and I'd like to add my welcome to everyone for attending and thank you for being here. I'm here today to demonstrate the Unicode Statistics Tool. We'll take a look at a couple examples of code and what types of things that the migration tool is going to target as potential issues for the conversion process. Now, this only pertains to Delphi code that was written in versions 2007 and before. We'll be using Delphi 10.1 Borland for the conversion and the fixing process. Now, keep in mind that Delphi 2009 was the first version to introduce Unicode support, so it's between versions 2007 and 2009 is where the Unicode hurdle is that we'll be jumping over today. Okay, let's take a look at an example. I've got the Unicode Statistics Tool here on my desktop. We'll get this started. Nothing too fancy here, pretty straightforward. It's asking for a directory where our code is located. So I've got an example sitting out on my computer that's waiting for us. So we'll navigate down to said folder, Documents, and this will be in my dev stuff. We've got a Unicode analysis folder and then example. Open this up, process files. This process should take just another 10 seconds or so, running through all the files in this folder, analyzing it for a set of tokens. There's about 20 or so tokens that it's looking for. So there's a summary pane up at the top here, tells us how many of each of the occurrences of the tokens that it found. And on the lower pane tells us with a nice outline view of the units that were used, the number of files, lines, and so we've got kind of metadata for the application, and then specifically each of the tokens that were searched for. So of course this is all about strings, so it listed how many strings there were in this application, 14,000 and something. The copy command, the link command, read, write, and so on. So we can see pretty lengthy list of information here. Now we could expand each one of these and examine them, see what's underneath them. What I like to do instead is to move this over to a spreadsheet and do some compilation of analysis, if you will. Okay, now that we've got our information from our sample application output by our statistics tool, let's take that information and move it over to a spreadsheet where we can view things a little bit better, larger picture, and see all the information we have to work with, and perhaps maybe compare it to some other examples that I've run prior to this. On the statistics tool, notice in the lower right hand corner we've got a Save Report button. We'll select that and then direct the sample text output to our desktop. Save that. Let's bring that up now. Here in the text file, notice what we've got is each of these outline nodes now expanded to show all the detail underneath them. So here we are with the used units as the first item that was searched for, and the next token is several pages down, and so on. Just out of curiosity, let's scroll down to the bottom and see how big this file is. So we're looking at almost 19,000 lines of information. Now if you wanted to parse out this information and look at all of what the statistics tool is output, you could probably analyze this into paralysis and basically end up taking more time than the conversion itself would take. So what I like to do is move it to a spreadsheet. So what we'll do is we'll copy the entire text file and open up our spreadsheet we've got sitting here handily and open up a new tab on it. I'm going to paste this into the spreadsheet. Now nicely it's separated the tokens that it searched for, put those in column A and all the detail in column B. Well again, I'm just wanting to do a high level analysis of this information, so the information in column B I don't really care about at this point. Too much detail. We're just trying to get a high level estimate of effort required. So I'm going to delete column B, jump over to column A, and then do a quick sort on it. That'll bring everything up to the top, and notice there's only 34 lines of information. So the three of these, the used units, files, and lines, is what I'd consider the meta information. So if we take these three, and we're going to add another column here for our sample on our main page, and then take each of those pieces and move them over. So with the lines, we see we've got 397,411 lines of code. So let's drop that in here, 397,411. Back to the sheet. We're not going to use that anymore here. Used units 697. Let's add that in here now too. And again, mainly this information is just for comparison's sake to other applications. And then the last one we want is number of files, so 546 files in this application. Now I wouldn't call this a large application. I'd call it probably a moderate to small at almost 400,000 lines of code. Now back over on our detail sheet, I'm going to do a sort again to get rid of those empty lines. And then since I've run this a couple times before, we're going to go over to another sheet and take a formula that I've created for parsing out, separating the numbers from the descriptions. So on back over here on sheet 3, what we'll do is paste that formula. Now if we take this and paste it into our new sheet, okay, it looks like I've got a couple extra tokens that I used in the previous example there. So we'll just clean that up a little bit, resize some columns, and now let's take this whole thing and resort according to the third column. The only reason behind that is that's the way I've got the others sorted, so they'll go into my comparison page a little easier. We'll take this list, copy it, jump over to my comparison tab, and what I need here is to paste the values. And again, a little bit of cleanup, make things easier to read. We'll write justify, tell it to use commas, and oh yeah, use numbers. No decimal places needed. Okay, now we've got a good sample. Get to see our comparison. Now, looking down farther toward the bottom, mainly what I like to do with this is get a sum of all the items that the statistics tool comes up with. I approach estimation using this tool very similar to a function point analysis might be used for estimating new development work. Anyone familiar with a function point analysis in a very simple form or a very simple scenario? Let's say once you determine how many forms are needed in an application. Okay, so now for some comparative analysis. Looking at column I where our sample is, which actually matches up with column D. This is a project that was migrated a few years ago, and it looks like it's on the relatively high side of an application, although not huge. And then next to it in column C is another application that was migrated. Having a look at the comparison, and really this is just math. We won't execute this on the new sample. The example 1 in column C, notice it took 60 hours to migrate this application. Total of, we'll scroll this down, you can see that there was a total of 658 files, 213,000 lines of code. Took 60 hours. This was kind of on the high side in terms of relative effort needed. Looking at the hours relative to the sum, we're looking at about 1 hour per 50 function points or statistic points, if you will. Sample 2, the one we just ran, many more items that the statistics tool came up with, 10,000, 10 times more. And this one took 200 hours to migrate. Notice on the percentage wise, it's much lower, went much quicker, much less work to be done. So this one came out to about 150 function points per hour. So if you want to take a nice round number stab at an estimate, then I think 100 function points per hour is a pretty good place to start. There's just a couple more things I'd like to point out at this point in the process to keep in mind on conversion and estimates on the migration process. One is that libraries tend to generate a lot more function points from the statistics tool than a regular application will. If we look at columns D, G, and H, you'll notice that the numbers on these tend to be higher. Looking at line 39, you can see that the percentage of function points per lines of code is much higher, probably normally on the magnitude of about twice as many on these than the regular applications. Notice the sample we just ran was actually a library, so it did come out with many more function points. The reason for this is that libraries tend to be much more low level, and of course what we're talking about with Unicode, changing the way that strings are stored, is a very low level type thing. So libraries will generate more function points. Something else to keep in mind is areas of your application that work at a low level. One of the best examples that I know of is a password. When a password is entered into an application, typically the characters are read one at a time and some kind of encryption is done before it's stored into a database, and then when the checking is done for it, the information is pulled back out of the database and decrypted. So you're dealing with the password string on a byte by byte level. Those are types of things to target initially when doing a migration. You want to tackle the hardest things first to make sure that you can get through those, and then any dependencies. And of course, libraries are the main dependencies that have to be tackled first, and then any of the more difficult things that are in the main part of the application, such as a password, encryption, decryption. One last thing I want to point out on the spreadsheet is notice columns G and H. You've probably already seen the headings that Delphi 7 and Delphi 2007 VCL. I thought it might be a fun exercise to take all of the source code from Delphi 7 and run it through the statistics tool, as well as the last non-Unicode version of the VCL in Delphi 2007. And again, you can see that the numbers of function points and the percentages of function points per lines is quite high on both of these. Most of the examples that I've got for you today that we're about to take a look at are from the Delphi 2007 VCL. So we can get a little bit of an idea what the developers of Delphi went through in order to bring Delphi into Unicode compliance. Okay, enough of analysis. Let's go look at some code. Okay, enough of the spreadsheet. Let's go take a look at Borland. We'll get Borland started here. And I've got 5 little applications, all packages, so they're all component-based libraries. And of course we've got this ready to be opened. And we're going to start with package 1. Let's do a Shift F9 trying to build this. And we get 5 errors off the bat, not surprisingly. Now let's take a look at the first one here. We've got a p-ANSI char and a p-WIDEChar incompatible types. Now when the incompatible types error pops up, the first of the data types is the data type that Delphi is looking for, and the second one is the one that we gave it. So the first thing to do is kind of decipher this line of code and see where these two mismatches are taking place. If we look at the user type name, hover over it, it's a string, so that's not what we're looking for. If we look at the function that's being called, notice that the only p-ANSI char that's in this whole line is the third parameter to this. So if we inspect the third parameter, we can see that it is been typecast to a p-char, which is of course a WIDEChar nowadays. Okay, so now that we found where the error occurs, possibly the easiest thing to do is change the typecasting of this user type name to a p-ANSI char and see if that satisfies the compiler. We start off with 5 errors, we run another build, and we're down to 4 errors. So that at least took care of the compilation issue. Gets us down to the next one, and it looks like we've got the same occurrence of the typecasting mismatch. Now, of course, once you've made these changes, you probably want to make note of where they're occurring so that they can be tested specifically, or if you've got a very thorough testing process, then you can be sure that the testing covers these areas. But otherwise, just because they compile works successfully doesn't mean you're going to have the functionality will still be the same. Now all 4 of these look to be about the same, so we're going to be satisfied with our typecasting at this point and be done with package 1 for now. Okay, let's move on to package number 2. Select that one, let's try a build, and again, not surprisingly, we have some errors. Now this one is a very simple incompatible types. If we hover over it, we see we've got a string and an array of char. Let's investigate where these guys came from. So if we scroll up just a little bit, up to the top of this method, you can see that neither name or the variable lf face name started out or are declared in this method. So we've got a little bit more far-reaching consequences when we make changes to this. So let's see where they come from. I'm going to control and click on the variable, and we see this opens us up to the WinAPI Windows source file. Probably not a good idea to change this one. This is part of the Delphi's core library. You do have another option here, is to create another record of your own that will take the place of this one, But the big downside to that is how much surface area this has and what acts upon it, and you could be running down a very long, deep rabbit hole. So let's go back to where we were with in the graphics source file, and let's see where name comes from. Name is font data name, which is ultimately a type of string. Now, again, it looks like this one has been changed from a regular string to a type, which is probably what's causing the error condition. The line that the error occurred on, if we take a look at, go back to name, and let's try something like, since I'm suspicious that this used to be a string, I'm going to call that a string now, change the typing of that, and looks like we've got rid of that error. Now again, we just got rid of the compiler error. We're not confident at this point whether we've changed any of the functionality, so of course that needs to be fully tested and probably a little more analysis done on it, but we've got through the compile on that one line. Okay, this next error is not Unicode related, so we're going to skip this and move on to package number 3. Attempting a build on package 3 now yields the very unsurprising 2 errors. Now this scenario is a little bit different in that the first warning that's being displayed is the dispose string is deprecated, which means we probably should be doing something completely different here, but because this is about fixing Unicode issues, we're going to stick with that theme and look at the first error, that we've got a type mismatch, ANSI string and Unicode string. Now the dispose string method, if we hover over it, we can see that it's expecting an ANSI string, and view context, having updated in this version, is now a Unicode string. But instead of typecasting it, which would probably work just fine, I've taken a little different approach here, something a little more creative, in that if we look at the dispose string and see what happens here, and again it's kind of low level, so I don't like changing data types at something at a low level if I can get away with something else. So what I've done in this case is created another class, and my utility, AG utility class, now has a dispose string method that is expecting a Unicode string as opposed to an ANSI string. And if we look at the method, you can see the functionality is exactly the same, but now we've got our own independent method. This works fine as long as the surface area isn't too much or it creates too much of a rabbit hole. You'll know this almost immediately after trying to compile again. So we'll call the TAG utility dispose string method, and we'll jump back to this utility. Notice this is a class procedure, so an instance is not needed to create this or to call this method. So we'll call it with the class name, and that should take care of that issue. We'll go ahead and do one more compile, and we see that we get a whole nother set of issues that are not Unicode related any longer. Okay, that brings us up to package number 4. Now let's see what kind of surprises are in store for us with package 4. Attempt to build, 3 errors. Here's a pretty straightforward one. Incompatible types, ANSI char and char. So again, we've got multiple things happening here, so we can see that what's being supplied is the char typed W, which is being assigned to an ANSI char. So we're going to go with the simple solution here. Reclassify W as an ANSI char so it will be assigned into there appropriately. Notice we've got 3 errors. Let's try a new build, and we're down to 2. Same thing again. done. The last error is not Unicode related. So again, we'll ignore and move on to package number 5. Last but not least, package number 5. Let's give this one a build. 4 errors. This one we're going to use as a little different type of example. Instead of going to fix this one, what we're going to do is use it to illustrate some of the additional functions that have been added to the product over the years for helping with this migration issue. Many of the times we've got a type mismatch between ANSI char or string and a wide or Unicode char or string. So if we look at the function in this case, OEM to ANSI, it seems very specific to an ANSI string, of course. So if we control click on it, open up the Windows API Windows unit file, we'll illustrate something here of what has been added and expanded in the support methods. So we've got OEM to char, OEM to char A, and OEM to char W. As you may guess, the A and the W are for ANSI and wide string, and OEM char is simply an alias to the wide string. So what you see here is a lot of times if you're using the old aliased OEM to char in this case, that used to map to the A version for ANSI, now maps to W, there's usually, or say sometimes, an alternative method that still maps back to ANSI if you need that. That's all we're going to talk about for package 5, and that wraps up our examples. So hopefully this has been helpful for you in your migration efforts, and I wish you happy Unicoding. Thank you much. Bye.
Thank you, Terry, for that wonderful presentation on migrating Unicode. In this next session, we'll discuss migrating data access. If your application connects to a database or works with data, then you really need to look at FireDAC. FireDAC is a fantastic data access framework that supports a large variety of databases and has incredible in-memory features as well. It is based on the model that the BDE established, but much more robust and lightweight. In this section, we'll discuss the new FireDAC data access library. We'll look at the Refine tool that includes automated migration scripts to migrate from any DAC, BDE, or DB Express to FireDAC. Or you can use the Delphi parser tool, which is an automatic tool migration system that currently supports FireDAC migration but is also expandable. Let me turn this presentation over to David I to discuss an overview of FireDAC, Embarcadero's new data access library, how to use FireDAC and ODBC to get to paradox and DBase tables. This would be important if you want to keep your legacy paradox or DBase tables when you are migrating to newer versions of RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder, or if you want to move off of Paradox or DBase to a SQL relational database like Embarcadero's InterBase database, and we'll also show the steps for BDE to FireDAC migration of forms and source code.
FireDAC is the multi-device data access library that comes with RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. One thing you can do with FireDAC is you can talk to SQL databases. You can also use an ODBC connection to talk to ODBC data sources. And there is also information on the FireDAC doc wiki about how you can migrate your database engine legacy applications to use FireDAC to talk to InterBase databases and other databases. And the FireDAC architecture provides a couple ways to do this. One is by having direct connection to SQL databases. You can also go through the bridge driver through ODBC And if you have an ODBC driver for an existing database, for example, a Paradox or DBase table, or some other database, you can get to and use FireDAC's powerful architecture to work with those databases in place. One choice you have in moving to FireDAC, where you may want to keep your legacy Paradox and DBase tables intact, is you can use FireDAC with its ODBC bridge. First thing you do is create the ODBC connection using the Microsoft Windows control panel. Then in your Delphi and C++ builder apps, drop a TFD connection component, choose the ODBC connection name as your data source, then drop a TFD table component and set the table name property to the Paradox or DBase database table that you want to use. And there's information about this in the FireDAC doc wiki. Let's take a quick look at how you would set up to use FireDACs to talk with a Paradox table via ODBC. So the first thing you'll do is you'll go to your control panel in Windows. Under Administrative Tools, there are two applets. One, set up ODBC data sources for 32-bit Windows, and then set up ODBC data sources for 64-bit Windows. I'm going to build a 32-bit app, so I'll go in and set the data source administrator for 32-bit, and I've got a Paradox test data source name that I've set up, and I've configured it to work with Paradox5.x. I've selected the directory to point to the samples table that comes with exe7, and in that samples data folder there are a bunch of DBase and Paradox tables. Then in the IDE I've got a sample project. The TFD connection component is there. I'll right mouse click, bring up the connection editor. You'll see that I've chosen the connection definition name to be that Paradox ODBC, and I've set the data source property to the Paradox text ODBC data source name, and I can test to make sure that works. And it says that it can connect to those underlying databases, and I've got a connection now to Paradox ODBC. Next, I'll connect the FD connection. I'll drop down a FD table component, and under here I can choose the table name property, and I can set that to the name of my Paradox table, in this case the BioLife. We can also use the pull down to select other tables that are available. Once that table is selected, it knows that the species number is the index, so the index field name gets set for me. And I can activate the table. And then I've used the Live Bindings wizard to set a string grid. So when I activate the table, I can see the data live at design time. So that's how I can use FireDAC through ODBC and keep my Paradox or DBase tables when I'm building my applications. Let's say you want to get off of Paradox or DBase and you want to move to a SQL database. In our case, InterBase fits very nicely in that migration scheme because it's an easily deployed, easily embeddable database that can run on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and Linux platforms. There are several different editions. There's the developer edition, which comes with RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder, so you can do your development. There's a desktop version of InterBase for deploying desktop applications to your users. There's the server that runs on several different platforms. There's also InterBase to Go, which is an embeddable either static library or dynamic library as part of your application, which gives you the full InterBase server support. And there's IB Lite, which is a small footprint, free and easy to deploy version of InterBase that you can use across all the Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android platforms. IB Lite is free. It has a limit of 100 megabytes, but for small Paradox and DBase table installations, it's a great fit. It's available again on the Windows, OS X, iOS, and Android platforms for your applications that you might want to move from Windows to other platforms. It's binary compatible at a database on all platforms and with all the editions of InterBase. And just by changing the registration key, you can directly upgrade it to the full power of InterBase with InterBase to Go, with full encryption support and no limit on the database size. So over here on the InterBase page, you'll see the different product editions, IB Lite, InterBase to Go, InterBase Desktop, and InterBase Server, and all of the different capabilities that each one of those has. as far as number of CPUs, number of simultaneous users, encryption, strong encryption support, database file size, and so on. As far as moving an application and moving your Paradox or DBase table into InterBase, on the FireDAC page, there's a Migrate the BDE to FireDAC set of steps. There are pages for that. I have the links down below that'll take you through taking the existing source code, your existing forms in Delphi, and running the refined utility, which is a per regular expression search and replace utility, and there's a script for migrating BDE that will convert the forms and the source code for Delphi into use FireDAC, whether it's in data modules, on your forms, and in your source code for database connectivity. Now, the BDE is still available via separate registered user download. You'll need to install the BDE, and in the IDE, if you want to do design time, you'll need to install the components. Once you've migrated over to FireDAC, you don't need the BDE anymore. The only other part of the work is to migrate your Paradox or DBase data into InterBase, whether it's InterBase Lite, free distributable on Windows and other platforms, or into another edition of InterBase. What's great is the people at Clever Components have an InterBase data pump, and it'll take any ADO, BDE, or InterBase data source and database, and it'll migrate it to a target InterBase database. And it's a free download. I've got the URL there. And over on the Clever Components page, you'll see the InterBase data pump landing page where you can see the steps, and there's a download link at the bottom. Here's what the InterBase data pump looks like. There's 3 steps to the process. The first step is to choose the source. So, for example, it might be a BDE source, and then you can navigate to the databases. So, for example, I've got my Paradox test, and then once we've chosen the BDE source, I can also go down and set the destination database. So, for example, it might be InterBase GDB, or it might be an InterBase 7 IB file. And then you navigate to that IB file. Step 2 is to match up the data sources, and step 3 is to do the pump. So once we've migrated the data, we're ready to start the BDE to FireDAC migration of your forms and source code. So let's take a look at what's available with FireDAC for doing the migration and the scripts that are available for converting a BDE-based Paradox application into an InterBase application. For BDE migration, there's a DocWiki entry for looking at that. I've got that loaded over here. It just takes you through all sorts of steps, taking your high-level alias for BDE and migrating it to a FireDAC connection. The high-level types and data types and field types have component counterparts and field counterparts in FireDAC. And there's a whole step-by-step process. And again, there's all the steps involved and some hints along the way as well. There's a batch file that's included in the samples under, it's under Samples, Object Pascal Database FireDAC Tool Refined, BDE to FD Migration demo. There's a batch file in here, and in Refined, there's for BDE migration, there's this migration script. So the batch file here just says, delete a subdirectory, which is going to be the FireDAC version of the sample app. It's the master detail Marine Adventures app that we've been shipping forever. It'll convert the source files and the DFM file using this script. What does the script look like? Well, it's a bunch of commands for the refined utility to transfer and convert the names of components and source code to the FireDAC version. So T-trans isolation is converted to an option in FireDAC, and so on. It'll convert T database, so database name is connection name, alias name is connection definition name. So these are all the migration things that'll take place. A T database goes to a TFD connection, a T session to TFD manager, T table to FT table, T query, and so on to TFD query. Here's my IDE with this Marine Adventure sample with got a data module with a database component and a bunch of T-table components and query components. You know, this is all the BDE stuff. And then we go and we can run that migration script, that batch file over here. Let's just go and run that. Here's the demo source code with all the DFMs. The batch file is is down here in the middle somewhere. Here it is right here. So let's just run that. It's running the migration script. And then finally over on, we have the DFMs with FireDAC in it. So let's just say open project. Let's go to the FireDAC master app, open this one. And now we've got the same application user interface. And again, in the data module, we've got an FD connection component. We've got a TFD table, TFD query, FD queries, and so on. So that's how easy it is to take your forms and your source code and convert it into a FireDAC application. So to summarize, you have a couple choices. You can use FireDAC and the ODBC bridge to get to your Paradox and DBase tables and build your applications with FireDAC. You can migrate your Paradox and DBase data that you were using with the BDE to InterBase using something like the Clever Components InterBase Data Pump, or you can write your own applications if you install the BDE to read those tables and write the data out to InterBase. And then using the refined utility and the batch file that comes with FireDAC, you can migrate your source code and your BDE-based form files, including data modules, to use FireDAC. Point the FireDAC now at the InterBase database data source, and you have your application moved off the BDE and using FireDAC.
Thank you, David I, for that wonderful presentation on FireDAC and how to move off of the BDE to FireDAC. Next, let's discuss some resources to help you move from MIDAS DCOM to DataSnap. The newer DataSnap was previously known as MIDAS, and it was a DCOM-based software technology that enabled RAD creation of multi-tier database applications. The DataSnap components approach allows Delphi or C++ builder to create data broker client applications with TCP/IP, DCOM, HTTP, or even SOAP transport protocols. The TCP and HTTP transport are implemented using respectively a server-side service and an ISAPI DLL that act as proxies for the DCOM server. Now, for historical trivia, the first release, then known as MIDAS, appeared way back in Delphi version 3. The name was changed to DataSnap in version 6. Now, for those of you who are looking to convert old MIDAS remote provider-based applications to the new DataSnap REST remote dataset-based approach, here are some resources to help. Now, this may be one of the more difficult functionalities to convert Migrate in old Delphi C++ builder applications, but David I has this blog post with these 4 resources that will help you migrate your legacy DCOM-based DataSnap servers all the way up to the new Delphi 10.1 Berlin. Now, Code Rage, webinar videos, and white papers also exist to help you move from MIDAS DCOM to DataSnap. Now, we don't have time in this webinar to go into any details here, but if you folks have interest in this, then we can consider doing a webinar on this topic only. Now let's discuss the MIDA converter tool as one of the ways to convert your VCL applications to FireMonkey applications. The MIDA converter is an application that can take your existing VCL apps which have legacy code in them and convert the code and the VCL so that it becomes a FireMonkey app. So when you have the need to target multi-device platforms, Windows 32, Windows 64, Mac OS X, iOS, and Android, you will be able to leverage your existing VCL Windows applications and create multi-device true native apps. The MIDA VCL to FireMonkey converter tool will help you convert your VCL apps to FireMonkey apps. The MIDA converter is a third-party IDE extension that automates some aspects of migrating VCL applications to FireMonkey. Now, it also might be nice to have the MIDA converter in your tool chest even if you don't have any legacy code. You could use it to convert VCL demos, code snippets, and maybe even components to work in FireMonkey for you. So you can look at the MIDA converter homepage and try it out for yourself. Now let me quickly turn this presentation back over to David I for a quick discussion on what's possible with using the meter converter.
The third way to migrate your existing VCL applications is to use the MIDA converter, and I have the URL there. What it does is it converts your VCL form into a FireMonkey form. If you have database access component, it'll create the live bindings that'll bind database access and fields to the user interface components, because FireMonkey doesn't have equivalents of database components like you have in the VCL with a DB edit versus a T edit. What FireMonkey provides is a live binding mechanism that lets you bind any data set and any data source into your user interface component. So it's much more flexible that way. The MIDA converter supports standard VCL components that come with RAD Studio Berlin. It also supports some third-party components like T-Chart, for example. And the FAQ on the MIDA converter site will show you what third-party components are currently supported. And then you can contact the developers at MIDA Converter if you need additional third-party components supported.
I mentioned our new Migration and Upgrade Center webpage at the beginning of this webinar, and here I'll mention it again to let you know that Embarcadero is here to help. We really want to know how you are doing with your legacy Delphi and C++ builder migration, so please try using the Talk to Migration Specialist Today button that will get you in contact with an Embarcadero resource to help you with your migration and help answer any migration questions. As we come to the end of this webinar, let me just take a few minutes and tell you that these are the current special offers and promotions for Delphi, C++ Builder, and RAD Studio through September 2016. So our hard work in supporting Windows 10 features has paid off, and now we want to share with you how 10.1 Berlin updates are supporting the very latest Windows Anniversary Edition. And this will include new features improving support for migrating existing applications using the Windows Desktop Bridge. To celebrate the upcoming release of Berlin 10.1 updates, Embarcadero is offering a 10% discount for upgrades and new license purchases. And if you act now, you could also get the free bonus pack. You can get the free bonus pack with your purchase of RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder 10.1 Berlin. And it has a value of $899 US. And the bonus pack includes VCL controls, Kanopka signature, radiant shapes, premium styles for VCL and FireMonkey, and the new updated Object Pascal handbook by Marco Cantu. The last special offer is you can get the mobile add-on pack for free. So if you buy or migrate to the current Delphi or C++ Builder 10.1 Professional Berlin, you will receive a free mobile add-on pack. And as usual, please visit embarcadero.com/red offer for other current promotions and terms and conditions. Tomorrow, September 22, if you are available and interested, our RAD Studio product manager, Mr. Marco Cantu, is doing a webinar on learning about how to use the latest Windows 10 Anniversary Update technology in your Delphi applications. Among the many new features of Windows 10 Anniversary Edition, there is one of particular interest to Delphi and C++ Builder developers, the Windows Desktop Bridge, also known as Project Centennial. So this is a way to convert existing WinAPI applications into first-class UWP, Universal Windows Platform applications that can be executed safely on Windows 10 and distributed on the Windows 10 store eventually. So if you are available, please join the RAD Studio product manager, Marco Cantu, to learn the latest about how to leverage this technology in your Delphi apps. And you can sign up for this webinar at embt.co/Delphi Win 10 webinar. Here are a list of additional resources, papers, and videos to help migrate your legacy Delphi and C++ Builder applications to the current 10.1 Berlin version. Most, if not all, of these resources you can get from the main new Migration and Upgrade Center website. So here we have the resources grouped by the three main focus areas of this webinar: Unicode, migrations of database and middleware, and migrating third-party components and libraries. This ends this Migrating Delphi Case Studies webinar. Thank you all for attending. Now let's open this webinar for any questions you might have.
So how do they find BDE if they need to be able to recompile, Al?
As we mentioned in one of the videos, the BDE is still available as a separate download. Are you just missing the BDE installed in your IDE? So on our Code Central website, you can download the BDE separately. You may simply be missing it from your IDE.
What is the recommended way to treat strings that are used for manipulating bytes, including null characters, in the newer version of Delphi?
Let's see, did we not create a new type like a raw byte string?
Raw byte string. So a raw byte string enables the passing of string data of any code page without doing any code page conversions. The purpose of raw byte string is to reduce the need for multiple overloads of procedures that read string data. Oh, does FireDAC have data type mapping between the different databases, for example, InterBase, Microsoft SQL Server, and MySQL, to possible data types, Delphi data types?
I believe when we do the migration, you can map data from one database to another database as one of the steps.
So I'm not sure if it's asking about mapping between databases, between databases, or between Delphi types. So are there Delphi types that map to the database types? Which there are.
Hey, it's Stephen here. I know one of the things that I have worked with some of the customers on in the past is where they're migrating from older versions up to new, and some of the things with the database field types is that things like a date time field could be a number of different types of field for putting a date time into. So it could be a date time, an SQL timestamp. So there's a handful of different field types. One of the things that's really cool when you migrate through to FireDAC is that on the TFD connection, you can actually define how those fields should map through. So if you're actually going to map your code to point to InterBase, then you can have it working pretty quickly and easily. But then if you also want the product to work with SQL Server or Oracle, then they use slightly different date field types. So rather than having the incorrect date type, like field type throughout your product, then wherever you're using the date fields, you can just map it on the FD connection to say, right, if I get this field type, map it to this one within my code. So you can then basically just treat all dates and times like a T-date time. And then FireDAC will then take care of the mapping of those field types for you behind the scene, which is pretty awesome. So that really that's one of the big things that it allows you to do in terms of connecting through to different databases as you go through. Now, moving up, I know we've kind of had a look at the migration tool, but the Refind, there's really good scripts for Refind, and Refind's not only for kind of migrating kind of BDE code. Refind works off a Perl script, and if you have a look at the DocWiki help, it's really, really good. I've actually worked with companies up in the financial sector up in London, and they've been moving multi-million line projects through Unicode. We sat down with them in November a couple of years ago, and the whole project was done before they broke for Christmas. And they did that because they were using Refind to actually take their code, run the command line against it, see what came out, what was broken at the other end, and then they're updating the Perl script. With it, you can take specific uses out, add new uses in. So if you're swapping from one grid component to another, which is something that's been a couple of questions about, you can say, right, if I find this uses clause, either take it out or swap it with this, and you can add in one or multiple uses to replace it with. So you can kind of do that level of change as well. You can also say, if I find this type of property referenced in my code, then go ahead and change it to this So that will really help in terms of migrating from one component set to another. So if you've got a little bit of patience to sit down and do it, and you want it done automatically for you, then Refind a command line point is absolutely an awesome way to be able to migrate a huge amount of code and components from one set to another as well.
So there's a few asked questions here about links for the data pump which you put that here. It's clever on clevercomponents.com, so we can go out there and find the data pump. And
a simpler question, like, is the Jedi components in the Get It package manager? I remember seeing them for XE8 through 10 Seattle. Do you see them in 10.1 Berlin? I'm not seeing them currently.
They're not currently in 10.1 Berlin. There was something that happened in the installer, and so it wasn't in there. It may get back in there again later. Yeah, so sometimes we have challenges as far as synchronizing the process with the open source development team on some of these projects to get them in here. So there's something about the installer did not work in 10.1 Berlin, but I think it's probably fixed now, and so hopefully we'll see it back in again after update 1. If your database is based on T dataset or T dataset derived components, what sort of migration issues should you look for? Or will it be pretty simple? So the Refind utility is designed for migrating from T dataset based ones, because the FireDAC is based on the T dataset, just like BDE was. It really makes it easy for that type of model to migrate over, because FireDAC is based on the same model. And so Refind makes it easy to migrate between, essentially Refind makes it easy to migrate between T dataset derived packages. The scripts that come with it are defined for BDE, but I think there's scripts for other T dataset derived datasets or data access frameworks as well. I have database in DB2. I need to move to Oracle 11. Any tips, links to tips, procedures, how I can go about this, please? So actually, FireDAC has some, the ETL functions. If you go out to the skill sprints and look for the ETL, extract, transform, and load. If you check out the skill sprint, then it will find it has, it makes it easy to use FireDAC to load data from one database, transform it, and then put it back into another database. I use this a lot for, like, if I have data in a spreadsheet, for example, that I need to move into a database or move between databases and stuff like that. It's really easy to do. There's a number of third-party libraries and utilities out there. There's actually one called ETL. Let's see if I can find it real quick here. ETL Tools, I think. Yeah, ETL Tools. That is, let's see, the URL for that is etl-tools.com. Is a tool specifically around that as well for moving data between databases, making changes to it and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a question here from Martin about assembler, migrating applications that have got assembler code in them. One of the things that certainly if you're trying to take your code cross-platform and get it ready for being able to go cross-platform, then assembler code blocks are only going to work on the compiler area that you've got them set up for. The recommended path really is to move the code into Pascal blocks, and certainly if you're looking to migrate up so you can get 64-bit compiler, your 32-bit code, assembler code, is not going to work on a 64-bit compiler. So you can either just kind of if-def it, or you can just replace it with a Pascal version, whatever it's doing. Now, the one thing that you do need to remember is that if you are going to be using assembler code on 64-bit, then you do need to have that code in a separate function block to the normal Pascal code. So you can't have kind of a bit of Pascal, then a bit of assembler, and then a bit of Pascal in the same function. You need to actually separate the assembler part out into a separate function that you call from the initial method that you're running down. So that's probably the only gotcha around it. But there's, if you have a look on my blog, the Delphi.co.uk, there's an article there about migrating to 64-bit, and that will give you some of the answers around the assembler code stuff as well.
Excellent. Here's a question. If the refine utility is available in all Delphi Berlin editions, Starter edition does not include data access components, so you wouldn't be able to use refine with it, I guess, technically, though it is available with Pro and up. So, if I design an application for Mac and decide to use InterBase to go, is that free for me to use for each application I sell, or do I purchase a license for each client application that I develop? Steven, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. InterBase to go is there is a charge for each deployment, basically. And the more seats that you're buying, the cheaper it gets. So have a chat with one of your sales reps. They can help you around kind of the pricing and what we can do with you there for that. If you want a free version of InterBase, then there's IB Lite. You get a license for that. If you have a look in your license registration email that comes with your Rad Studio, you'll find the serial number for InterBase to go. For the InterBase to go trial and the IB Lite trial. The IB Lite is the free one, but the InterBase to go trial license. There's some stuff coming up and around that, but that's the kind of short of it. The great thing about using InterBase to go for your client applications is not only you introducing things like the award-winning change views and capability that allows you to track at a field level what's changing in the database and then have multiple people subscribing to that. But you're also able to then have all the cool encryption and stuff that you need for the safe storage of business data. So that's definitely a very, very powerful option to have.
So there's a question here about migrating from quick reports to fast reports. Since quick reports are no longer available, how do you migrate to fast reports?
Is there not a built-in converter in fast reports to take quick reports projects and import them into fast report?
There is.
I believe there is.
Yeah, fast reports does have a converter. It's called convertqr2fr.pass, which you can use to convert quick report files to fast report. You would need to edit the code so that it's calling fast report instead of quick reports, but the report files themselves can be converted using the fast reports converter.
Yeah, there's quite a few different report engines that fast reports will do conversion over from. I found from a couple of people who have used them that the feedback is that it kind of gets about 80-90% of the way. Some of the really simple reports, it will do pretty much everything. Some of the more complicated ones, you might have to go in just to tweak slightly around the edges. But it's certainly, it saves a lot of the grunt work in terms of moving the base controls and bits over and laying them out and so on. So.
Yeah, and the other option is you can go, you can still use quick reports, it's just not included in the box. So that's an option as well. You can go get a quick reports license and check that out as well. So you can quick reports.
Malcolm's saying that the MIDAS converter has a quick reports to fast reports converter as well. So it's probably using the same thing built into it.
Wow, that's so cool.
Great. That's cool. Thanks, Malcolm.
Is there any latest Unicode version or compatible version available for TopGrid? Are either of you familiar with TopGrid?
So I am not, but let's see.
No, it's not one that I've used myself in the past. I did a quick search and there was a few conversations around it, and people suggesting a few different things, so I'd suggest doing a Google search on that one. Once you've found a grid that you want to use instead, or if you've managed to find somebody who's got the source code updated, that is the other option, is to update the source code yourself if you do have it for third-party components. Is then just kind of compile it and go with it, or just use something like we find again to swap out from the TopGrid one over to the new one.
I found that converting from visual components tends to be a lot more work. Although one trick I've done, and this is one of those things that I've learned with experience, is that frequently I find that I will create a component using, I'll descend from the components I'm using, and so I don't actually use the stock components, if you will. I use a component I've created that descends from it, And what that does is that allows me in the future, if I need to swap out that component, all I have to do is change what component my component inherits from. And then all the places that I'm using that particular component, it just uses the one the descended component. That doesn't change. It can be tricky, especially around visual components, though, making the old component compatible with the new component. Grids are probably the biggest offender of that because there's so much complexity to them. But that's one trick you can do to make it easier to migrate between different components like that.
Okay, there's a question here from David about interest in moving up to the Enterprise Edition with Delphi, and if you purchase it now, will you get the upgrades? Yeah, basically, one of the big things that is a shift is that update subscriptions is now included with the product. Yeah, it's kind of been something that's been slowly coming, but 10.1 billion was the first product that includes the update subscriptions with it. And what that is basically allowing us to do as a company is over the year, because then anybody who's going to be on it is going to be on a latest edition with update subscription running, is allowing us to actually release a longer release cycle, and part of that is being able to then release additional stuff out to you and talk more about what's coming up, to those who are on the latest editions as well. There's a number of challenges that software companies face around publicly talking about what they've got coming up and everything to do with certain things that unscrupulous companies have done in the past, and unfortunately that causes a whole load of challenges for us, and it's great now being more on the subscription model that we can actually deliver more in the updates. Some of the handcuffs have been taken off from us in that respect, so we're going to have longer release cycles and more stuff coming into each release as it's brought through, which is awesome. And before, from handcuffs from the accounts side of things and the way that big international companies have to report their stuff through was kind of challenging some of that. So that's a really kind of positive thing. So yeah, absolutely get it now. You'll get all the latest stuff. Anybody who's on 10.1 billion with a current subscription, so anybody who's bought 10.1 billion is going to be getting all the stuff, all the updates. That's all kind of that's something that's you don't need to worry about. So absolutely get on. Especially with the 10% off right now to the end of the month.
Yep, I was going to say
and
10% off. And the bonus.
Yes. Francis has put a question here about currently using T-SQL connection to connect to Microsoft SQL Server database on XE2, migrating the app up, getting an IB database not found error. Any tips? So that basically sounds like that your SQL your T-SQL connection is pointing to an InterBase driver, which is what that would look like. So maybe it's trying to tell you something that you might get a better deal on InterBase than SQL Server. I don't know. Yeah, basically, the one thing I would say, though, Francis, is that the people I've been speaking to on the road, there's one guy I was chatting to in Sweden, and I was over there for an event, and we're having a chat, and he said, yeah, I've just done the jump from, following some of the stuff I've been looking at, I've done the jump moving to FireDAC from ADO, and my application is now about 25% faster overnight, and a lot of the database connectivity issues that I had with it dropping regularly have just disappeared. Customers absolutely love it, and my application is so much faster, we've released it as a major update. So he was kind of laughing because major update meant he was able to kind of earn more from his customer base, but also was reducing his support overhead as well at the same time. So definitely, if you're connecting to SQL Server, have a look at moving that up to FireDAC as well, and you'll then have bidirectional data sets. You won't have to have all kind of the if you're using client data sets, because you need to have bidirectional cursors. You can just move back away from those unless you really want to kind of maintain that architecture. So there's a lot of really, really good reasons to move on to FireDAC from there. One thing I will do is I will just pop into the chat lower a link that's I know is being really, really popular at the moment. Microsoft SQL Server in the process of actually changing a lot of the way their pricing works with SQL Server 2016 and trying to move a lot of people up onto the cloud. And if you actually need local data storage and you're storing any data that's identifiable data, so it would be in the UK, it would be enough, it would be a gender and a postcode would be identifiable data because it could be the only male or female living in that postcode area. You need to have that data encrypted at rest. So the only level of SQL Server that has is the Enterprise Edition. And to kind of give you an example, an Enterprise Edition minimum licensing is 8 cores. It's around about $57,000 compared to just over $7,000 for InterBase, which provides the on-disk encryption at rest features. So some exceptionally worthwhile pricing if you are kind of considering those kind of things. But I'll pop a link into the chat on that for you.
Yeah, there's a number of situations where InterBase becomes a much better price than SQL Server. And there's a few things you can do with InterBase that you can't do with SQL Server, which is really cool. That if encryption has become more and more important these days, and InterBase just has that in spades and is probably the best database around for that. I love the column level encryption. I can't tell you how many times I wished I had that in the past.
Yeah, having granular column level encryption that you can control, and my favorite InterBase story at the moment is actually from Korea. So when we had all these pharmacies were having to send huge amounts of data around, and they now have actually put a copy of InterBase next to the SQL Server at head office, and its job is just to be kept updated with all the drug information for the pharmacies. And then using change views, the pharmacies connect up to it, and it just gets the delta back of what's changed, basically in the SQL Server database because it's being mirrored into the InterBase one. And InterBase manages then producing deltas out for each of the sites, regardless of when they connected up last. And they've literally got hundreds of sites connected up to that, and it's saving them $30,000 or $40,000 a month just on data movement costs, which is pretty awesome.
So there's a question here about why we're using the new naming convention of Seattle, Berlin, etc. It's something to do different, I guess. Every now and then we change the way to do naming. But if you look around the industry, especially at operating systems, so Apple's got Mavericks and Sierra and all the different cat versions and stuff like that they're doing for their OSs. Windows is just Windows 10. Ubuntu does names. WordPress does names for their releases. It's kind of everybody's moved away from version numbers to naming. We wanted to keep version numbers in there, which is why it's still 10 and 10.1, and the next release will be 10.2. But just because it's a little easier as well, but it's so you know which is which. Because sometimes I'm like, wait, is Sierra newer or older than Mavericks? Especially with the cats, I couldn't ever remember with the cats. So yeah, it's kind of the way the industry's going as far as version naming is just giving them names instead of numbers, but we're kind of doing a combination of both.
Now, there's a question about does the BDE still work when they're compiled with Delphi Berlin? We don't test it anymore. The BDE is 8-bit. If you're trying to deploy anything out, if you get any security audits, you will just get red flags all over yourself all day long if you're still using the BDE because it's just not strong enough in any shape, way, or form. So definitely, if you're getting up to Berlin, get your code migrated onto FireDAC and get off the BDE. And the great thing is you can, if you're on something that's even a few versions back where the BDE was still being shipped in, do the work there. Use Refind to migrate the stuff through and get it moved up. It definitely does help to kind of get out of the way of the BDE.
So Jeff's saying that they have a word processor that's very focused on dealing with individual character manipulation, and they're looking to rewrite it to deal with Unicode. Ask if there's any suggestions. So one thing is that the way, if you're dealing with your strings as strings of characters and individual characters, then the Unicode versus pre-Unicode strings should behave very, very much the same. The issues and where it becomes incompatibility is when you either assume that it's of a particular code page, or when you are sticking raw binary data in your strings. So it should probably be very, very easy for that you make that migration. Now, if you're doing something where you're taking assuming that a string or an individual character is a single byte, and you're converting a character to a byte or a string into an array of bytes and back again, well, then you might have some issues unless you use some of the utilities, the functions around that specifically. But if you're just dealing with characters, strings of characters and characters, it should be really, really straightforward to make the migration, because that was the assumed use case of strings.
One question here, can anybody sell their components via Get Manager? Basically, at the moment we've got a number of our components that you can download and pull into there. There's a number of open source ones that Embarcadero done a pretty good job actually recently of helping sponsor to keep them updated and moved up to date. And they're in there. We are working with some of the leading third-party vendors at the moment, evaluating whether we can do more kind of their components through there as well. So a lot of the architecture and infrastructure is going into Get Manager to kind of look at that kind of stuff in the future. There may be opportunities to add additional components in there. If there's open source ones that you know at the moment that you'd like to suggest or use, then please do kind of forward an email through to us. They are being evaluated on which ones we can add in. And in terms of selling some for the future and being a transaction handle from Embarcadero, that's all stuff that's being looked at and considered. There's no firm decision either way on that at the moment, but certainly keep posted. Absolutely.
Any plans to merge CodeSite Studio into RAD Studio instead of having Express? I don't know if there's plans to do that or not. It's an interesting suggestion. You could go to quality.embarcadero.com and make that suggestion. I haven't heard anything about that. There are advantages to having it as a standalone utility as well, though. So maybe it'll exist as both. Hard to say. So yeah, go to quality.embarcadero.com, make a suggestion, and we'll see what happens. So there's a lot of people still asking about TopGrid. A few people have posted that they've not had any luck migrating TopGrid in here, and that so apparently it's the advice I've seen in the comments is to migrate away from TopGrid. That's just what I'm seeing here so far. There may be somebody else that's having good success with it. So anybody out there that's had success or experience with migrating from TopGrid, if you want to share those in the chat window or the Q&A window, do that, and we'll try and forward those along here. Do applications using the BDE still work when they are compiled with Delphi Berlin? Oh, you already answered that one. We don't test it. But it should work. Because I think based on my knowledge because it worked in Seattle, but we didn't test it with Berlin, I don't believe. But based on my knowledge of what changed in Berlin architecturally, I believe it would still be compatible. So there's a question here about installing the BDE onto a Windows Server 2012 R2 machine. Wow. You probably can get it to work, but you're probably going to have to go through a lot of work. You're really going to need to know your way around Windows 2000 because of all the different policies and restrictions it puts on things. The BDE is prior to, UAC and all those things, those best practices that Microsoft's instituted about writing data where. So it'll probably need to run with elevated permissions, which Windows Server does not like. So good luck. Here's questions around the GitHub Manager, if anyone can sell their components on there. I believe the long-term plan is that we are going to open this up so that other third parties can sell their components right through there. Currently, third parties cannot sell their components through the GitHub Package Manager, but the plan is that we will have that, and that I think we're planning to try and handle the the payments. That's a big undertaking, though, and we're still a little ways off from doing that. An option you can do, and currently there is no formalized process for getting in there, but if you do have a substantial useful component package, you can have a free version or a trial version possibly in the package manager, and then users can contact you directly to buy it. I don't think we have any that are doing that yet, but that would be one possibility, just because we don't have the payment structure set up, although I think that's something that's planned on the roadmap for the future. So, any resources on how to use DOS command component of TurboPack? Not that I'm familiar with, but I think I've seen it. Seen others using it. Give it a shot. There is a demo. There may be demos in the package itself that you get installed from Get It Package Manager, but I'm not positive on that. Has anyone tested UniGUI with Borland? I have not tested it, but I know a lot of people that love UniGUI and use it like crazy, and I have not heard any issues with Borland. Not heard any issues. So I would suspect it works. I'm not been out to UniGUI's website, but if they go out there, they probably say they support Borland. Some are free. So the conversion tools, we've listed a lot of conversion tools here. Some of them are free. Some of them are included in the with your purchase, and some of them are that need third-party licenses.
So Trevor, trying to do his migration, but he has a component called ProfGrid. So personally, I'm not familiar with ProfGrid, and he claims it no longer exists. It's gone out of business. So one option might be to try to use the adapter pattern that we spoke about briefly, and take a look at the example using Delphi with the adapter pattern. So, for example, if you have millions of lines of code that are calling this ProfGrid that you don't want to remove, maybe you can find a grid that does something similar to what ProfGrid does, and using the adapter pattern, keep the code the way it is, and just have the calls go to a new library that does grid. So that might be an option.
Yeah, what that would look like is you would go to your older version of Delphi, or anything, and just make a new component called tProfGrid with the same unit name that ProfGrid was in, and then implement all the properties and methods and behaviors of that grid so that to your code it looks the same. And then inside it wraps another grid, whatever that other grid happens to be, whether it's Ray or DevExpress's grid or whatever. And a simple thing is, when you go in and make that component to begin with, and you hit build, and it's going to say, "Whoa, tried to use your tProfGrid, but it doesn't have a method called sort." Oh, okay, I need to write sort. Write sort. Build. Oh, I tried to call your tProfGrid, but it doesn't have a method called whatever, and you just keep going. Or you can make a list ahead of time if you kind of know what methods it uses and such. But
that's right. So a typical example with the adapter pattern is if you've ever tried to import like a VBX or an OCX module, Delphi will generate a new class which translates the interface of the external control into a Pascal compatible interface. So similar to how the adapter pattern will work.
So there's a question here about where to find the Unicode Statistics Tool. So all of these, they're all at the Migration Center, right?
Yes, you can go to that main Migration Center. Most of the links are there, but in the answer I put the direct link up on Code Central. Yeah, so that main migration page. So Embarcadero created this new Migration and Update Center, RAD in action. See, did I put the link anywhere? So in the chat window, I put in the main RAD in action Migration Update Center link, and from that link, you should be able to access all the resource links you see on this on the slide now, including the Unicode Statistics Tool. Next question: FireDAC working with REM objects. So I do see FireDAC with REM objects. So I myself have not tried it.
So it depends on what you're trying to do with REM objects. If you're trying to connect to a data abstract middle tier with FireDAC, that won't work because you have to use the data abstract client components to connect to the data abstract middle tier. Now, once you've connected to that data abstract middle tier and pulled data down into a DataSnap or a data set descendant with DataSnap, then you can use FireDAC local SQL and things like that to manipulate that. That's one thing that's cool about FireDAC is like the local SQL components and such will work with any data set descendant. So it's possible you could use those with data abstract or data abstract. I haven't used REM object data abstract in years though, so I'm not positive how it works. But if it's using a data set descendant in there, then yes, you can.
Okay, and a question here on doing migration, having trouble finding certain libraries like TurboPower's Async Pro, so for C++ Builder. All right, so I know I've done successfully, so you're going from, okay, C Builder 6 to XE7, so you're looking for TurboPower Async Pro for XE7. So I believe in the past there was either some SourceForge or from GitHub, TurboPower Async Pro if you wanted to go back to XE7. So let me find the links for that. Yeah, I know what you speak of. I recall that certain libraries' names have been changed, and I think I even did the write-up on this for what you had to do to get the name to match again. So let me find that write-up I did, and Erica, I'll send you that write-up, and when everybody gets the follow-up emails with all the questions and answers, so everybody will have that answer also. So I do recall TurboPower Async Pro is available for XE7 if you're migrating from C Builder 6 to XE7. So I'll get that information for you.
So there's a question here about which is faster, middle tier over TCP/IP/HTTP. So I'm not sure if he's asking if it's faster to go with TCP/IP versus HTTP or which middle tier is faster. So HTTP is built on top of TCP/IP. So generally speaking, TCP/IP is faster. Now, there's other things to consider in there as well, though, because if you're doing a SAPI module where you're creating a DataSnap middle tier that's plugged into a SAPI or using RAD server plugged into a SAPI, well, Windows Internet Information Server runs at a lower level than a client application because it's installed into the OS. And so in that case, it's able to take advantage of a number of performance improvements and will probably be faster than a TCP/IP application running at the application level. So then in that case, HTTP will be faster. Now, if your bottleneck is bandwidth, then you're going to want a middle tier that's compressing your data for communication because then they're going to use less bandwidth. But if your bottleneck is server performance because your server is overloaded, then compressing your data on your server is going to use more CPU. And so in that case, you're going to want one that doesn't compress. Now, you could always add a proxy in the middle or something in the middle that compresses the data in route or something along those lines. You could add additional servers. So there isn't an easy answer to that question. Generally speaking, I think RAD server is, well, you can be just as fast with DataSnap as RAD server, but I think RAD server is faster out of the box, but DataSnap is more flexible. Is probably be a rule of thumb there. And so with being more flexible with DataSnap, you could probably be faster with DataSnap, but it would take a lot of effort on your part to get there. Not a lot, but more effort on your part to get there. So hopefully that answers your question. There's a lot of other middle tiers available out there as well by third parties, and you're certainly welcome to investigate those. But generally speaking, those criteria I mentioned will apply across all those. So for example, if your middle tier sends it as binary data, that can be faster. That's an advantage of DataSnap is you can send it as binary data. Whereas if you're sending it as XML, that's slower because XML is more verbose, whereas JSON is right in the middle. It's still text-based, but it's not as verbose as XML. So there's lots of things to consider. Does Delphi 10 Borland support TOS ADV DB grid? I'm not familiar with that one. Are you familiar with that one, Al? Top Grid. Is that Top Grid? Okay, so Top Grid apparently is not being updated anymore. There was some questions about this in an earlier session. And so And some people said actually some of the later versions were pretty buggy. That's just based on the comments earlier. It may have moved to a different site or something like that, and I'm just not aware of that. So a lot of people were suggesting migrating away to a different grid in that situation. So it's not, Berlin would work with it if it was updated to work with the latest version of Berlin, but just apparently has not been updated. Are there good migration for client dataset with nested datasets? So my understanding of the intricacies of nested datasets is while the FD memo table also supports nested datasets, it supports them in a different way. And so if you're using nested datasets with T-client dataset, keep using T-client dataset. There's not really a migration away from that at this point. The FD table supports a number of other features beyond what client dataset supports. So right now, both of those exist in parity. For new development, we do recommend FD table, but there are some features where T-client dataset does do things differently or superiorly. We're still supporting both. We haven't deprecated T-client dataset, and I don't know that we're planning to at this point. If at some point we do, and then we'll provide a migration utility to migrate away from it. And Erica's reporting that down to just a few issues with one unit. Thanks for your help. Really appreciate it. That's great. Great to hear that, Erica. I don't know about MIDAS 64-bit issues, William. If you are familiar with issues, you might check quality.embarcadero.com. Make sure you've logged any bugs you've encountered there, or check the status of those bugs to see if they've been updated, fixed, or being dealt with.
I'll just mention one more time our new Migration and Upgrade Center website. So, Embarcadero is definitely here to help. So we really want to know how you're doing with your migrations of legacy Delphi and C++ builder code to the newer version. So please take advantage of that Talk to a Migration Specialist Today button and let us know what issues you're having. So we are here to help.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. And hopefully you'll join us back tomorrow for the Windows 10 webinar, and we'll talk to everyone later. Thank you so much. Thanks, Al.
Okay, thank you.
And guest Centari, our thanks as well.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.